Welcome to episode 19 of Sullivan Street, where we're going to catch up on Counting Crows, of course, and all the news in the last 6 months. We've been very busy during interviews and album reviews, everything else. And we're going to talk about one of the special Crows historical venues, Hammerstein Ballroom. But first, let's say hi to Chris. Chris, how are
Hey, how's it going? It's Hammerstein, a special venue, but also a special place for both of us. That's what we're going to
you?
talk about.
Yes,
About a couple of
yes.
shows that
And you're right,
are
it's Hammerstein.
meaningful
I
to
said
us.
Hammerstein. It's horrible.
I
I lived in New
assume
York.
I'm right about but that's one of those things. Who knows?
Yeah,
Honestly,
no, I
like,
think you're right, actually. But you're
um,
right. We should know. But you're right.
yeah, a
Special
lot's
venue
been
for
going
both of
on.
us.
A lot's been going on. It feels like things are starting in Crow's Land are starting to come alive for the spring. I feel like things are happening, and it looks like we're heading towards an interesting summer and maybe fall and maybe an
Yeah,
interesting couple of years. I don't know. We'll see.
I agree. And with the last couple episodes, of course, we had guests and interviewed them, David and Chris, and we hope to do more interviews in the future. That's a lot of fun to do those interviews, and we
Mhm.
really get to learn a lot. The only, not drawback, but then we usually don't have time to just kind of catch up about the Crows or catch up with each other. Um, let's start off by giving maybe a little note about another podcast because Adam did a long form interview. I mean, he does quite a number of podcast interviews. In fact, in particular, in the last couple of years,
Mhm.
I feel that he's really done them, even going back to Bob Saget's, which, of course, Bob passed away. I'd like to revisit that one because actually that was one of my favorite
Yeah.
interviews because he actually talked about some deep track things there. Like he even talked about why some of the songs like Good Luck, I think, like never got released and some yeah, because
Is Bob a fan of Good Luck? Because that
he
tracks. But apparently, Bob Saget, big fan of a sad song. Uh,
okay. I know he is a Crows fan, and that one I forget. I have to go back and listen to it, and I forget if he was a
yeah, I gotta give it a
fan.
listen. I've had that one. I've had that one my YouTube watch later for a long time, and then Bob Saget passed, and it was a little too.
Yeah, no, I
That would
agree.
feel a little weird to watch, but maybe now it's time, and it's time to go back and
Yeah,
check that one out.
and don't
Uh,
quote me if it was Good Luck. I think it was, but it was one of the older songs from the demo tape. But yeah, this I guess a week or so ago, the YouTube release was on what is it? Lip Service is the
mhm.
name. I think sponsored by Spin. I waited to listen to it until it got released on podcast, and then in that sense, they did it in two installments, kind of like we do sometimes here on Sullivan Street. And people said it was a great interview, and it's funny. I listened to part one. I didn't think part one was that interesting, partly because he goes through kind of the same. It wasn't his fault; it was just the questions. He went through kind of the formation of the band and when was the first song he wrote. You know, that first song about his sister. Just things I've heard before, and I thought had done a lot better with Jeff Harkness's book,
There's a
Rain
lot.
King.
I mean, yeah. There's if you could read Jeff's book kind of along with it at
Exactly.
points.
So I was impressed by that. But then the part two came out, and that I liked a little more. So even things that I heard before, and I'm not going to give it all away. Please listen to Lip Service. Um, like he talked a lot more detail on how the song "Long December" started, and his
Mhm.
friend in the hospital, and really got into the
Long
detail.
story on that. I like that story. That was really
Yep.
interesting to hear and kind of get that detail. And I will say, if you haven't read Jeff's book, well, first of all, you should. But this was one of the longer and more detailed, I think, discussions of the formation of the band that I think Adam has done kind of one sitting, right? I
Yes.
always feel like actually one of the great things about Jeff's book is it takes a lot of stuff that had been discussed in different places and brings it all together. And I think this interview was actually another nice place to hear a lot of detail covered. I think the host asked a lot of great questions and really sort of digging into
Mm.
some of these details about how the band got started and what the process was like and choices they were making, Adam's work in multiple other bands at the time, and how Counting Crows sort of like became the lead band and things like that. I thought there was some interesting stuff there that um again, you can find some of that detail in other places, but he really kind of laid it out in long form, which I thought was nice.
I agree. A little more detail about the Viper Room, his time
Mm.
there. I thought that was interesting. Some
Yeah,
yeah.
there's an interesting the Viper Room stuff is really interesting and sort of how he became a part of that place, but also just some of the casual stories
Yes.
of Adam just like, yeah, a couple of these movie stars called me up and told me I should come to this birthday party, and like just the thing of like what it was like to be the level of celebrity that Adam Duritz hit in the mid 90s, which
Yes.
I think we all knew he was a big star, but sometimes even Counting Crows fans, I think, forget a little bit how big a celebrity Adam Duritz was in like 1995. Um, and also just it's just sort of fun name droppy sort of
Yeah.
stories where you're like, oh, that's kind of an interesting one. Um,
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I almost think, and I know I'm going to go back to I mentioned before I like the Pumpkins, but I almost think one reason why like Billy Corgan and Adam were almost like, but it has to do with also their look, right? Like Adam with the dreads and Billy Corgan when he started shaving his head, because I think like Eddie Vedder is as big as a rock star as them, but I think almost wouldn't be recognized as quick on the street by the average person, at least that I think. Where Adam right away, people knew who he was if they had seen any of their videos or appearances on TV.
right, very distinct. And I think, and, it's Corrigan's interesting analysis there too, or analogy, because they're both. It's hard to make fun of what Eddie Vedder looks like. He just kind of looks
Yes.
like a rock singer, whereas Adam and Billy Corgan, even to some extent, Kurt Cobain, kind of the way
Mm.
he dressed, kind of easy to parody.
Yeah.
Um, there was some level where I think that in the 90s especially created a different energy around all of those people because they became parodyable.
I,
um
I think you're right. I think it's a great point. Good. There's some little stuff about accidentally in love in
mhm.
there, but that just kind of neat. Three other things that just kind of caught my eye. One, people mentioned on the message board and everything that if you didn't hear, they are, or if you didn't see on their Facebook page, they are recording Butter Miracle Part Two. It
It's not a
the
sweet,
Not a sweet, which I was
not a
going to say,
sweet.
but which I do think he's serious though that he wants to call it Sweet Tooth instead of Sweet Two.
I'd
It
like that
sounds
better.
like he's being jokey, but I think he actually, and he said even if it was a sweet, wanted to call it Sweet Tooth. It sounds like it'll eventually all be released as one album, but who knows? For those actually collecting CDs like I do, that would be nice. He said that they're base. He like it seems like they're going to record six, and he's going to pick 4 to 5 to put on the album, 4 or 5. So
Yeah, maybe they
uh,
do all six. Maybe there's a bonus. Maybe something's a bonus
a
track
bonus
saved for
track or
something, or
something
just
like
doesn't make the
that.
cut or whatever.
I'd love to know what he does with the. Do you know that story a while ago that he had the suite um, done for Sweet Two, and then he shelved all the songs. I want to know if
Yeah,
any of those parts end up getting used later, or do those parts get recorded as are they even like a solo piano song or something? I don't know. I'm sure there's something good there, even though he said he wanted A plus material, not B material or whatever.
yeah.
So
I'm always interested in artists' relationship to sort of their unused work.
yeah,
Um, there's because different artists have different takes on it. Some kind of it seems like they throw it away. Sometimes some seem to be actively reusing it in certain pieces, different things. I'm always just curious to hear about that, especially as someone I've done a lot of comedy writing, and there's an interesting thing in going back because sometimes you do find you're like, oh, that didn't work, but I can repurpose. And I hadn't done that for a long time, and I've started to do that recently because sometimes maybe I'm just getting older and less inspired, but
yeah,
sometimes it's fun to go back and go like, oh, that actually totally works. It's just that there's these three flaws, and if I fix these three flaws, right, take this to a different context, there's a different thing. So I'm
I,
curious to what extent he's, especially that material which is more recent, like whether that's just
yes.
gone or is it part, maybe a couple of these songs are that, I don't know, who knows,
I would love if that's one thing I always kind of liked about the Crows. I mean, we talked about with Jeff. I guess we'll talk about it later. That like some of the songs on Saturday Night, Sunday Morning were old songs that they, either fixed up or took out of the vault. I always kind of liked that with them, that there was a chance that some of these old songs might come back
Mhm.
because right, even 1492 was an older song, and and obviously the song August and everything after didn't get
Right,
released.
yeah.
So I'm always hoping that some of these tracks that I love, or Good Luck, or some of these other ones end up getting released at some point after getting reconfigured a little bit.
The one I'm most excited about, that when they said they found the master tapes for recovering the satellites, the and I don't know if there was ever details about to be confirmed this for sure, but there's one song they recorded for that. They only played it once or twice before the record came out, or in some of these like Viper Room shows. It's called Suffocate. And I've always liked that song, and I'd love to hear a properly recorded version of that, because no one's never, and even the tapes that exist of it are not, they're not great tapes.
Right.
Um, but it's always sounded like a pretty cool song. They're an interesting band because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of leftovers. Sometimes when people
Right.
talk about like, oh, will they release like a B-sides album? It's like, it
Right.
sounds like there's like half a dozen songs. Like there's
Yes.
just not a lot of, Adam does not sound like someone who leaves stuff unfinished, whereas there's lots of other writers who've got
Yes.
like piles. One of my other favorite musicians has been like releasing albums recently where it's just like, I think he's just emptying the vaults. He's just like, I got to get stuff out. I
Yeah.
want,
No, I
I've got
think
the stuff
Princeton
recorded. My
a
friend
pump.
Joe
Yeah.
Versman, like he released like at one point, um, like 10 EPs of like leftover songs from his first record. He's just like, I got this and I got this and I got just like,
No, that's
and it's
true.
always interesting with that because there's a lot of that songs you're like, yeah, I can see why he left that out. One or two of those songs are a couple of my favorite songs, you
Oh,
know, and I feel like you find that a lot with the people who are really prolific songwriters, is that, you know, of those 60, you're like, one or two are going to be like the songs where you're like, but no one can ever agree on what those one or two are. Right. That's what's like,
right.
oh, if they'd only put this one on the record, I know better. And it's like, no, but then the other person is like, that song's perfect. You're like, that song's just a throwaway, you know.
Right. Right. Or
Art
didn't
is
fit into the
subjective,
theme.
Eric,
Yeah.
apparently. I
That's
know I've
right.
hit on a very deep and never before discussed point that art is a subjective medium, and fans and artists sometimes disagree on what the most valuable pieces of their art is.
And certainly Adam is someone that wants it to feel. He definitely is the type of person that would leave out a song that is fantastic. Again, not that there is that many, because it doesn't fit the rest of the album. In fact, he's admitted to doing that, a handful of times. So,
Yeah. Especially
I,
some of the early stuff, right? Where he said like some of those songs, he's like, some of those songs are good, but I don't believe them. They're not like what, like Einstein
right.
on the Beach is very very much
Yeah.
the classic one of that. The early Love and Addiction. There's some like good songs in there. They just like, oh yeah, it's like I didn't want, just wasn't what I wanted the band to be. They're just songs I wrote, you know, when I
Yeah.
was trying to figure things out, you know. Um,
And speaking of him writing, I just thought he had a really interesting line, which is not surprising to me at all, but it came up during the interview when he was talking about writing Butter Miracle Suite One. Um, and oh, but by the way, just to re-emphasize your point about Suite Two, he said he was at one point going to force it to be a suite, right?
mm,
And then he said I'm forcing it. They're just separate songs, and I appreciate that artsmanship with him. But he did make the one line and said until he kind of wrote that Tall Grass at his friend's farm,
mhm.
he just didn't really. I think he used the word energy, but it sounded like he did not have a lot of motivation. And he said something like to write songs, like he just wasn't that interested in it. And if you go back and maybe half the songs are from Saturday Night Sunday Morning were written before or whatever,
Mhm.
and then if you look at Somewhere in the Wonderland was what 9 songs,
9
you might
songs,
be
yeah.
looking at what 5, 10, 15, 20 years where not that many were written, and it seemed like he maybe didn't have the enthusiasm, but it's at least back to some extent.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to see that. And you know, again, he's always been someone that again hasn't sort of spit songs out, at least hasn't done that for a long time. But it is interesting to hear him talk about that because it's such a um, you know, obviously writing songs is so fundamental to his nature, but it's also something that doesn't happen. He's not someone who seems like who gets up and writes a song a day. It's one of the different writers have different relationships to this, and it's always been one of the interesting things with Adam. I think is that um, it's when the inspiration strikes.
Yeah, or the motivation, right? So, and
Motivation, yeah.
I get that feeling from him a little bit that he could for, but then he deals with right, some of the mental concerns and everything. But like
Well, I
accidentally
also
in
think,
love, he forced himself to do it, and it came out. And when he wanted to be a rock and roll star, he had more motivation, right? Because
yeah. Well, I also think though there's something to the idea of there's a lot of comments around the end of around Saturday Nights and Sunday Mornings era about how like the album might be dead, right? Like that people they were. I
right,
think he was very early on the idea of like, look, the internet changes the way we consume music, and I think there's sometimes this idea of like, I don't. How much do I need to do? How should we release it? There's some conversations around that. And it's one of the interesting things I think about, you know, Suite One of like, hey, we have these 4 songs. We basically got an EP but it's a suite, which is interesting in itself. But the idea that we don't need to necessarily um, build a whole record.
Right.
Although interestingly, that hasn't led them. You could imagine the idea that that would lead him to be them dropping a single, two songs every year or something like that. That hasn't been the case, as opposed to someone like interestingly, Dan Leyes from Augustana has done that a lot over the last decade. It'd be like, I got two songs for you. Like, I don't have an album for you, but here's two songs to juice the algorithm, I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know.
and
Or
my
I've got two that I feel like putting out or whatever, you know.
and I could be totally wrong about this. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I bet you part of that is about like the again, I don't want to read too much, but about the logistics of recording and things like
Mm,
that. Like if you're going to
that's
get
a good
everyone
point.
together, you might as well get at least four songs out. But
Well, I think that's the thing is of being this band, a seven-piece band, as opposed to like a solo artist or someone who, like Dan Leyes, where Augustan is a band, but Augustan is really Dan Leyes at this point.
right,
It's less like, hey, I can call someone up and say, we're going to do a session in 2 weeks. The band doesn't seem to operate like that. So maybe Adam, maybe they had the idea at some point, oh, maybe we'll do two songs a year, but that doesn't seem like it fits the way
yeah.
they work, which is part of the process. It's got to fit the nature of the band a little bit. So,
Yeah, that's true. One other thing you said that just made me laugh, and for my own personal thing, because it was something I was talking to a friend this week who is training or went to some, I don't know, he's really high in like the Buddhist monk ranking. He went to some 5 week, and that's where we were catching up because he didn't have his phone access while he was going through training. And we were talking about anyway, middle age and older, and dealing with sometimes difficult people and stuff. And I say this because Adam had this kind of well, he's 60, right? I think he's 60 or about 60.
yeah,
60, yeah. And then he said or in August he'll be 60, I think, if I'm, or was it last year? Anyway,
it was
but
last year.
he said, you know, we get an age, people are dying. Make sure you reach out to people if you want to say hi. Do as much as you can because it gets difficult when you get older. And then the host said something like, "Oh, and maybe you don't want to hold on to grudges." And Adam's like, "Oh no, I'm holding on to those grudges." And I was like, I was kind of saying that to somebody this week, but then I was having exactly Adam's perspective, trying to be positive, trying to do this, but maybe some of the grudges I'll still hold.
Yeah,
So that was kind of funny. Last thing, just about that, just because I've seen people talk about it on social media, or sorry, ask about it in social media, and I think I even got a couple emails about it. Um, will he return and do Underwater Sunshine podcast? He said yes. Now, I didn't really listen to that very much. Maybe now that I host the Counting Crows podcast, I'll have to listen to it more. I think I listened to maybe 10 episodes of the, I think he did about 70 or 80 or
yeah.
90 or something
Well, but
like
it's
that.
not really a Counting Crows podcast.
No, it's
There's a
not.
couple of
Right.
pieces that are Counting Crows focused, but it's not a Counting Crows. It's a music podcast that happens
Right.
to be hosted by Adam
That's
Duritz, which
right.
is but I'd be happy to have it back. I'm always interested in hearing what new music Adam wants to recommend and
Yes.
hearing him talk about old songs. One of my most recommended podcasts from that run, if you haven't gone back and listened to all of them, which again, one could do that if you wanted to or not. There's one about backing vocals. It's
Oh,
just
that's the
about
one.
backing vocals, and it's
Yes, that's I heard
fantastic.
that one too. Yeah, that's one
Yeah,
of the ones I heard, and that, in fact, that's one of the ones I'm like, oh, I want to go back and re-listen to that. And at some point in the future, Chris, we'll tease the audience. It might be a year from now, but I definitely and started. I already took some notes about it. We'll be doing a show at some point of songs where Adam does the backing vocals.
yes, we should
we
we should
we that was
break
definitely
that
on my
down.
list.
Yeah, because those are he's a really good backing singer. He's a
So
really great
let's
frontman, really great backing singer too. So
Absolutely. So we have some other things maybe we'll get to today, maybe not. But one thing we do have to talk about more formally, at least for a little bit, is that they are going on tour very soon.
yeah, and you and I
Um,
both have tickets to shows now.
yes,
If this had happened, if we had talked about this a couple weeks ago, both you and I think were holding out, and then both you and I got kind of lucky, um, or we just live in the right places. But maybe we chose correctly. You could say not lucky. We
yes,
made our own luck by living where we do. But because the main, as people have said, the main thrust of this tour, they'll be opening for Santana in arenas and sheds across the country.
yes,
Um, but they are doing some solo headlining dates. Um, one in Central Park near me, and one out west near you. at a fairgrounds. It seems like.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think total. I think they're only doing about six, or is it six or eight, something like that, of them leading the show. And the one in Orange County, which I'm going to, which is really cool. Toad the Wet Sprocket, who I used to love in the '90s, is the opening band. And I understand that most kind of fans that would listen to this podcast that either love the Crows or are somewhat obsessed with them would want them to be the headline. So I understand that, but I also understand that. Yeah, we were talking before. This was probably the best opportunity for them. They're going to play in some arenas. They're not going to be playing in many arenas of 20,000 or whatever normally in the U.S. if they were the headline.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think again, I
yeah,
think the natural complaint is, look, you're a Counting Crows fan, you want to see the longest Counting Crows show possible. So I think it's always a little awkward when you find out the band is going on a tour where they're going to open up, just because we're paying a ticket and we don't get to pay less because we're going to see the opener and only getting an hour, or 80 minutes or whatever it ends up being. That's part of the open question too, is we actually don't know at this point how
yeah,
long
they
the
might
set's
play a
going to
full
be.
set. We're not sure. It might be
They
10
could
songs,
play
might be 20.
close. Yeah, they could play close to a full set. They could play something that's really truncated. We don't know. Um, I enjoy Santana. I saw the guy 15 years ago at the Garden.
Okay.
Some friend gave me a ticket. It's an enjoyable show, but it may not be for everyone. I know Adam, as a Bay Area guy, is a big. He's taught, and actually, one thing he talked about on that lip service interview was a little bit about that. They went out with Santana a long time ago.
Yeah, I think you said
Um,
15 years ago, something like that.
I think
I
it's more like
forget.
20. I think it's like
Or
oh
maybe
two
20.
or oh 03 or something like
Okay.
that.
And
Um,
in Europe, was it Europe you said
Europe.
part
He
of
said
it?
Europe,
Yeah.
but yeah, and
Okay.
basically they had great, and they went out and played. Adam sang with them a bunch, and so it sounds like, for the band, kind of a fun tour. And we assume, you know, they got a good offer, and this is how they feed their family. So I'm not no complaints there. I never make an argument there. It is what it is. But that was, I think, you and I were both kind of holding out to figure out what we were going to do with tickets, because
Yeah.
again,
And maybe
that's
even
the
in
other
some
thing too.
cases more expensive because, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Santana's kind of, is a big headliner, so you've got more expensive tickets for a shorter set, and I think
Yeah.
people were trying to figure out. Again, I think for fans that are like, I want to be in the front row, that's what I like doing. To pay more to, again, for a show that's going to be less crows,
Yeah.
it's just a weird thing sometimes. So we got a little bit lucky. Again, we're both getting headlining shows. You got Toad the Wet Sprocket. It looks like, I don't think this has been officially announced, but one of the other shows around New York, they listed an opener. Um, it looks like it's going to be James Maddock, who's a local New York singer songwriter, but with Immy. Immy
Hmm.
frequently plays with James Maddock, so it sounds like we're getting a huge dose of Immy all night. That's exciting, and always kind of fun to get an interesting opener. And I always love. I mean, we'll talk about one of my favorite venues tonight, the Hammerstein Ballroom, but I love seeing shows at Central Park Summer Stage. It's just beautiful. It's like surrounded. You're in the middle of Central Park, just kind of surrounded by trees and greenery. Like you're
Hmm.
in this like sort of lush little place. It's like cocoon from the world. And it's kind of a beautiful place to see a show on a summer night. So
Hmm.
I always get excited when I see a band is playing there, because I'm like, oh, that's a nice chance to go and hang out there. And I've seen the Crows there. I think it's twice. Maybe I'm forgetting one or two. I saw them do Good Morning America there a long time ago.
Hmm.
Um, Weird story there. I was going, my then girlfriend, now wife, was in a wedding, and I basically was going to do this Good Morning America thing, then take a train down to meet her. And the bridesmaids got up early, and they were, they had it on, and Cindy's like, "Oh, look, there's my boyfriend. There he is. You'll meet him in a little while, but there he is on the front row doing cheering." Um, and also one of the traveling circus and medicine shows
Oh.
was there in Central Park, which was a really awesome show. I think I actually had a gig for that show. I think I got like paid to like, or got free admission to like hand out posters. I don't know how I stumbled on that gig, but I'm positive that's the case. Weirdly, I went to that show with a person that I went to the Hammerstein show we're going to talk about tonight. It's
Okay.
weird. Sometimes you go to enough shows that until you start thinking about them, you kind of, some of these memories blend together.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Yeah,
you
and some are
know,
getting kind of old. The show
I
we're going to
know
talk about
it's
today is 25 years, so I'm like, what do I remember? And I have a pretty
uh
good memory, but
yeah, like I mean that
um,
show that I mean that other Central Park show is 50 years ago now, and
yeah,
I'm thinking that's it's not that long ago. It's when they did the traveling circus. No, the traveling circus is 15 years ago. So
unbelievable.
it's
Yeah,
almost like we're getting old with the band, Eric. It's
I
almost like
know.
that's what
Well,
we
we are. We always, yeah, we're always changing, right? That's what Adam said.
we are
Okay,
always
so yeah, it was 7 shows. Yeah, it was 7 shows that it looks like they're going to headline. So not many. Although, yeah, I'll try to get into so much, but there was a little asterisk by the California, and it wasn't entirely clear actually, like when it was for sale, and it looked like it was different, but the pre-sale was the same anyway. So I got decent tickets, but they weren't as great as they should have been. I like to be front, but that's okay.
will survive.
So
But you're
yeah,
getting a full 2 hours of crows probably. So that's
absolutely, and I like Toad, so it'll be fun. Let somebody else. I've been in the front before. Let somebody else enjoy it. I
yeah.
do
That
want
is
to
the thing
say,
as you do more shows is there are those who are like I got to be in the front and sometimes I'm like, I like being in the front but also I don't need to fight. I don't know.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you got to get in the right spot though. You can't be around the talkers. It's a tricky thing. It's a tricky
that
thing. You can't be
that's
too far
true.
back because then the
Yeah,
fans it might be
right. Because
might not
then,
be yeah.
as you said, some people in the front are annoying too. You get the people that don't know them, but they're just rich, or you get the obnoxious people that just want to
Mhm.
push their way. So yeah, no, no,
All the people in
it's
the front
sometimes
in New York shows that I know are wonderful people and are not like that at all. And they're all delightful people. They're
no,
not rich and annoying. So I want to be clear about that.
very good.
For any of you who are listening. Um,
The one thing I do want to say is that fans of the podcast, we always do like to hear from you.
hmm,
Again, you can always email us SullivanStreetPC at protonmail.com, and that's Sullivan Street all spelled out, and then PC for podcast at protonmail.com. We do get all the emails. I might mention one or two email questions we have right now. The other thing is that most people that listen to us, they do so on Apple Podcasts. I haven't asked anybody to review. Do so if you'd like, especially if it's positive. But in Spotify, there's a place, and only a few of you, a smaller portion, I should say, use Spotify, but there's a place that you can give feedback or questions to the podcaster. I do get those. It's weird because I can't respond to those the way it's set up. It's only a one-way feedback, and it's not publicly posted either. But for example, I'll just give
yeah.
one now. We got one back when we had Jeff Harkness on. Somebody asked, and maybe we weren't clear, and it said like, "Oh, Jeff, you said something about that recovering the satellites was originally supposed to be kind of suites or quarters. Like, what were like you mentioned, Jeff, that one of them was the Courtney Cox suite. Well, what were the other suites?" Um, and I did ask Jeff about this to add some clarification, and he said it's basically if you look in the back of the CD, you'll see that and I'm looking at so what, well, 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 songs, you'll see that there is a separation mark after the fourth song, after the seventh song, after the 10th song. And so those are the four quote unquote roughly grouped together songs. And I don't really see now the last four is where Monkey, Mercury, Long December, and Walkaways. So those might be the Courtney Cox songs. I guess that's what he
Yeah.
was talking
Well,
about.
that's definitely the Courtney Cox suite if that's the
Sweet.
case. Yeah.
And the first one seems to be all about sleeping. At least Angels of the Silences, Daylight Fading, and I'm Not Sleeping have some sleep theme. Even Catapult mentions sleeping a little bit, right? I think so. So anyway, that's I didn't really think about it too much about how they, but roughly I guess that's how we lumped them together for
Well,
those
and
that were
interestingly,
curious about
Goodnight
that.
Elizabeth and Children in Bloom are the two oldest songs. Those are from 94. So
Okay.
maybe that has something. Well, and those are both maybe about if you group that with it's grouped with Have You Seen Me Lately, that could kind of be about the experience of getting famous, essentially, right? If Goodnight Elizabeth, and certainly Goodnight Elizabeth is very much about that experience, the being on tour and what that means. Um, and then you got Miller's Angels, Another Horse Dreamers, and Recovering the Satellites. And I honestly don't know what those three, how those
Right. I have to think
you put
about
those
it, and
three
maybe,
together.
or maybe just said they're the miscellaneous song. So
I guess
about
you could say those are all Horse Dreamers is
oh
a hard one in there. Because I guess you could connect Satellites and Miller's Angels about
yeah.
a general theme about connection and recovering a sense of yourself, right? Miller's Angels is
Or the
about it, and
past, or something. And then, yeah, another horse dream. That's an old song, right? Or it references an old song. So
it
is
references
Marjorie. Yeah,
Marjorie Dreams of Horses, right? But I
yeah.
think that is a newer song at that
Okay.
point. Um, yeah, I mean, it's about dreaming.
Yeah.
Dreaming. I
So
mean, oh well, in Miller's Angels, right? Someone is sort of
that
hallucinating
dream.
at one
Yeah.
point, right? They haven't gone outside yesterday, and they're like losing touch with reality. So maybe another Horse Dreamers Blues fits in that way.
Yeah, so
Um,
that could be. So the rough, maybe, again, it didn't get finished, but those were the categories, and I never knew that. I didn't even. It's one of those things where you stare at it 100 times, when it came out, and I'm like, gosh, I never really saw that they were. Why were they separated in quarters? Except, and so that's the answer. Wait, one random piece of note that I want to talk about a new release that we didn't even talk about, Chris. I don't know if you know about this. That Adam did a release. I think you can see it on YouTube if you want. But do you know that he sang this song for Howard Stern? Do you know what I'm talking about?
no,
And
you caught
I
me here.
don't listen to Howard anymore, but I guess he did a joking thing that he wanted to do a song called Metamucil Man. And he actually, I think Howard sang it with his group. I don't know. Again, I haven't listened to him for years, maybe a decade or so. But then Adam covered the song. It's basically about going to the toilet, but he actually sings it like earnestly. So it is hilarious and good singing. So look it up. I forget how long the song is, but it is pretty
I look
funny that
forward to
he's
it.
the one. What is that?
I look forward to it. This is
Yeah, so
this is
that's
news to me.
so
I
so.
how I missed
Yeah,
that.
oh, it's yeah, 3 minute. It's a very slow song, almost like a Johnny Cash. So it's a 3 minute cover. So it's not like a 30-second thing. So anyway, so look at that. So the last, and then because this will be a nice segue into our when we talk about Hammerstein, Hammerstein. We'll find out. Somebody will write us.
Someone will correct us.
Someone will
Write
correct
us,
us.
write us, and let us know which one is correct.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
I guess I
but
could
I
look it
will.
up, but
Yeah, I mean, who's right and who's wrong?
who's right and who's wrong?
Unless you actually, please, if you own or run the Hammerstein Ballroom, please write to us
Let us
and
know.
corral us what is correct.
So obviously we interviewed David Lowery last episode, which was a lot of fun. After the interview, by the way, I went out to the last of the great Pioneer Town bars, which is a real
Mhm.
bar in Pioneer Town near Joshua Tree. Went in, had a drink there. So I say that because he actually, after the interview, when we said thank you, had a question or maybe he said it during the interview, but he was really curious about it. He said, I love this album. Do they still play all of these songs in concert? And our short answer was yes, except for Amy Hit the Atmosphere, which we will talk about in the concert thing coming up. But we actually did look, and we have a formal answer, and we let David know that almost the entire album they do still play. In fact, all the songs but three they played last year. They played Hanging Around, Colorblind, Mrs. Potter, St. Robinson, Wish I Was a Girl, High Life, 4 Days in Speedway, all in the 2023 tour. And that's pretty good for a third album that didn't have a lot of singles. So that leaves the following songs. One of them, which used to be a concert staple and breaks my heart, but they have not played in a long time. David's and actually Matt Malley's, both of their, I think, favorite song from the album, All My Friends. Last played 14 years ago, we found out. So we hope that gets into the rotation soon.
Yeah,
Yep. You have a comment?
I could not believe it had been that long with that song, and I think my brain slightly aligns that song with High Life.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, they play that song once in a while, and it turns out no. It turns out it's been a very long time since I've seen them play
A
that.
long time. Amy Hit the Atmosphere was last played 20 years ago, which we'll mention again
Mhm.
soon. And surprisingly, even more recently than All My Friends, but it has been a while, they played Kid Things last 11 years ago. So there you go. And we will be talking about more this Desert Life because we will be reviewing the album soon, probably in 2 or 3 um, episodes. So should we,
It's the next one in the order. We're just going to
yes.
keep going with the officially released records as we
Yeah,
go.
so let's do that. I have other things we can mention, but we got to keep some stuff on the list for next
Hmm.
time. So let's go into Hammerstein, and Chris had the great idea. Now, for me, one of the reasons, and we'll just mention this. One of the reasons this came up was because my first, this we're going to talk about my first show, which I already referenced a few times, even our first episode. But Chris had the idea of let's talk about this venue a bit. So, Chris, want to talk about that?
Sure. So, you know, it's interesting that it kind of works out nicely for us. Your first show was there, my second show was there, but it is kind of, I think, a relatively kind of famous venue for the Crows, right? It's where Live at the 10 spot and thus the second electric disc of Across a Wire was recorded. And it's been a venue they returned to. They did several shows there um, on the This Desert Life tour, which you saw the first of that run. They did several shows on the Hard Candy tour, which has one of my favorite versions of Goodnight Elizabeth, which we'll talk about.
Hmm.
They did this what turned out to be a pretty historic show in 2004 that was my all-time second Crow show, which was Matt Malley's last show with the band, um, which is an interesting
Yes.
story. And re-listening to it the other day, we have some interesting notes on that one
Yeah.
relative to some of the conversations we've had about that. But then they've kept playing there on a pretty regular basis, particularly when you think about it for a band that's done a lot of outdoor type tours where they haven't hit those types of venues. Um, they did that venue in 2009 as part of the Traveling Circus and Medicine show. Great
Okay.
show with Augustana, Michael Franti, and Spearhead. I think that's the first one of those shows that I saw. That one was kind of it's a hard show, hard to rank those shows. I think
Mm.
I'm fond of that one in part because the first time you see it, you're like, this is incredible. That tour I think was pretty amazing. But it was one of those things that this after you saw it for the first time, you kind of knew what was happening, and so it lost a little bit of the magic from the first time where you're like, I have no idea what's going on and how this is supposed to work.
All right.
Um, but then they played there multiple times again in 2012. In 2013, another one I actually missed the 2012 show, but 2013 was a great show there as well. I actually sent that one interestingly. Sent that one to Chris Porterfield, or at least a song from it, because we were talking about the band The Blue Nile, which he and
Mm.
Adam are big fans of. And at that show, Adam used a portion of "Stay," Blue Nile song, in the middle of Rain King.
Okay.
So great version of Rain King, worth seeking out if you're a fan, especially if you're a fan of the Blue Nile. Which,
Mm.
if you're not, that is another good Underwater Sunshine episode to go check out, because I think they're a really interesting band that I did not at all know the story of until I listened to that. And when I heard it, I was like, oh, I really love all of these songs. They're amazing. Um, but then they've continued to play there. Most recently, they did two shows there on their first tour after COVID in 2021,
Oh, I forgot about
which was
that.
kind of special. I saw one of those, and just nice to be back in a room seeing Counting Crows again.
Mm.
So it's been a place they've returned to, and sort of a historical. It's a great room. There's a great energy in there. If you've never been, it holds about 3,500 people for a concert. So a pretty good sized venue with a big open floor and a couple of balconies that you can
Mm.
be sort of in towards the back. And also, I was in one of these for the show in 2021. There are these little sort of areas on the side, like these little boxes essentially that go up on the side. And I was
Oh,
in like the
right.
lower box, which was kind of a cool place to see a show from. I hadn't seen one, I hadn't seen a concert there from that angle, and it was kind of a cool spot. I always assumed it was just VIP, but apparently
Mm.
they started, and maybe it used to be, and they started selling these tickets now.
Okay.
But I was like, ooh, that made that, and I think I admit that was part of it. When I was able to purchase that ticket, I was like, I feel like that makes me a very important person for the evening, even though I
Absolutely.
paid my way in um, for a reasonable price.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as I told you beforehand, I've seen two shows there. The one we'll talk about, which was my first show in 1999, and then in that one I was in the general admission below. I want to say I was like a third of the right. I don't know how far the general admission, or is it all general admission at the
It's the
bottom? I don't
floor is all
remember.
general
The
admission.
floor is
So
all general admission.
and
Yeah.
it's
So,
that's part of the thing though. It's a big floor. It's definitely the kind of place where you do not want to be towards the front and have to go to the bathroom.
oh,
That's
right. Yeah.
definitely a downside.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
it's going to be hard to get back to your friends.
That's right.
Not going
That's
to be
right.
easy.
I could be wrong. I know I was on the left side. I want to say I was like halfway. Halfway. I want to say right in the middle. I wasn't. Don't forget back then. I mean, this is when most of the fans of the band were like 18 to 25. So this is not the relaxed crowd. Like, oh, I don't care if I'm in the front. This is
Mhm.
like some frat boys pushing their way in front, people drunk showing up. Because I guess people now go drunk too. But
People still get
um,
drunk. Although I guess again, it's been about a decade, but I did almost once get in a fight with someone at a show in Los Angeles.
okay.
But we'll get there sometime. That's a really good show. We should listen to that at some point. But
At some point.
I
So,
can still remember that lady's face. She was very angry, and my then girlfriend, now wife, nearly got into a fight with her.
the other show, I can't remember who bought tickets. Me and my friend. That one, the 2002 show, but that one I was up in the upper level, which was still
Mm.
good, and partly because I like the Crows, and it was a great set. But today we'll start. Should I talk about the '99, and then we'll do
Yeah,
we'll
let's
go in
talk
we'll go
about
in
yeah.
sequential order. Yeah, I re-listened. I think the track list on the website might be a little wrong, or on the set list and their website is mostly okay. But I found two mistakes. I think, which was that it says that they played 4 days, but instead I think at that slot they played Omaha, if I read
Mhm.
it correctly, and then it says they played Recovering the Satellites, but instead they played Round Here, I think.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's two mistakes. But even with those, there, if you look at the stats, well, let me say again and again, I apologize if you go back to episode one, I mentioned some of this, but Desert Life was released 5 days, I think, before this, or 6 days before the concert. So as I said, I prepared all week because on a road trip and listened to the whole thing. And guess what? They played 7 of the 10 songs, I think, or I forget how many songs right now on Desert Life, but they basically played most of them. So
They were
about
not shy about playing that record on that tour, even though
no,
it had just come out. What
which
was
is
the one you
great.
were most looking forward to at that point?
You know what? I don't think. I was kind of not that it was my favorite song right away, but I was excited to see Hanging Around because I was
Mm.
proud. I was actually proud. I remember this was so weird because I didn't mention this before, but I actually remember. Maybe we'll talk about this in Desert Life. I happened to be home that day and watching whatever the MTV show with Carson Daly that was like live.
Total Request Live.
Total Request Live. I was there when they were there. Sorry, I was watching it in my mom's home when they
You were
premiered.
outside with a
Yeah,
sign
but,
next to the
but
NSYNC girls.
no, not
Post
at
up a
all.
sign.
Because this is like pre-internet, or pre where there was news about things, and that's where I remember I saw the premiere of Hanging Around
Mm.
on when they premiered it, and I was like, "This is cool." I remember feeling a sense of pride that my favorite band, or one of my top five bands, was still getting recognition, and it was a big deal that they were premiering a video on MTV. Like, I thought that was cool, and then the
Yeah.
fans. So I was kind of excited about seeing that live because obviously that would have been the first time I saw that live, and I remember liking the album, but I don't think at that state. I know my friend was already obsessed with Colorblind
Mm.
because it does get your attention right away, and it is such a dark melodic type of song, and I think so. I think those were the two. But it's funny when I look at the set list and listen to it. The songs I remember more hearing live are the actually Desert Life songs. So even though I didn't come in there thinking, "Oh, I got to hear this, got to hear this," I was just hoping to hear as many as possible. And I did have memories of them playing High Life. I totally remember that. I remembered Amy Hit the Atmosphere. I think, to be honest, that might have been one of the songs I really wanted to hear.
Mm.
Amy Hit the Atmosphere. Um,
And what brought you up? Because you weren't living in New York at the time, or were
oh,
you?
but I was in 202, but I was close by. I was in Delaware, I think, and near Philly, and we were just doing. And I used to live in New York, so I was like, "Oh, we'll go on a road trip," and then it kind of fit the road trip weekend because I was going to come back on a Sunday, and I
Well, there
said, "Oh,
you go.
I'll take off Monday and crash at my friend's place in Queens, not and then we'll go see the tour then." We just had lots of energy back then, and we said it'd be great to see them in New York City right after the album is released, and the fans will be hardcore and all in general mission, and it's generally true. the other memory about that show, and I'll get into some of the songs, is that I think I mentioned before that was the first concert. I've been to other concerts, but that was the first concert I definitely had quite a few beers before attending. I think I went to some.
Mm.
I think it just closed. There's some Irish bar. I think there was a couple, but near there, around near MSG.
Tempest Bar?
Um, yeah, I forget which one, but
That one
there's
just,
one that
I know that one just closed.
I
That's
think
why I
it
was
was
trying.
that one. I think it was that one where we got like maybe 3 drinks or 4 drinks there, and then walked over to right. That wouldn't have been too far a walk, right?
No, it's a couple blocks. In fact, I've
Yeah.
been to Tempest Bar many times before or after shows at the Hammerstein. My friends, I'm a big wrestling fan. There's wrestling shows at
Okay.
Hammerstein, and we would have. I've had a lot of drinks at Tempest Bar, Eric. I can
Yeah,
tell you
so it
that.
was either that one or another. But I do remember, and I remember that there were other Crows fans there. And so, as I said, the only thing bad is, in years that followed, maybe a decade later, a couple of concerts got ruined because I wanted to have too many cocktails before the show. But on
Yeah.
that
Well,
one,
that's part of the thing. I think of figuring out like what works for you at a show. I think it's
yeah,
interesting, kind of like I think anyone who is a little bit of a drinker has that journey of like, okay, what's the right amount
that's
for
the right amount. And that was my
at
friend
different times too.
was a big drinker. But one thing I remember, partly because of is that when I forget we were at the side of the bar, but this comes up a little bit, and that's why I'm glad that I re-listened because I was like, I thought Omaha was on the set list, and I say that because I do remember at the bar that we talked to. I guess there was like 3 girls, and one was like quite good looking, and she was like this tall college girl. I don't know. I'm guessing it went to NYU or something, but she was from Nebraska, and she was like bragging about how much Omaha meant to people. She was either from Omaha or near there.
Mm.
And she was like, "You don't know how much this song means to us from Omaha." And I just thought that was great. And I think I saw her after the show because I don't know if they stood next to us or not. That I can't. Maybe actually. And then when they played Omaha, of course, she was going nuts. And I remember just thinking like, all you have to do is name check a city, and yes, they'll be
I mean, Bruce Springsteen wrote a whole album called Nebraska.
right.
So I mean, I mean, Adam, one song's good, but the whole album. Although I guess it's the whole state. If you're from Omaha, you'd prefer that to Nebraska, I guess.
But she was
And I
also
guess,
in that age that like kind of grows anyway, right? So she was probably already a
yeah, yeah.
fan, and then I don't think she liked him because of that, but love that song even more. Plus, it's a great song. Um, yeah, I don't have too much. I when I went back and listened, the set list says that the encore, which might be right, is actually 5 songs. So that got
Hmm.
my attention. Um, and I think that might be right that they played 14 and then had a 5 song encore. Now I'd have to listen again just to make sure, but I think so because song number 14 was hanging around, so they might have ended there and then came back with Speedway. Have you seen me lately? Which was kind of a mid-tempo. Have you seen me lately? Right? It wasn't a super rocking, and it wasn't the acoustic version.
Yeah, it's that we they had gone, but they had like found this middle ground. Same, I think, with Mr. Jones in that period, where they kind of
Yes.
found it wasn't quite the storyteller's acoustic version, but it wasn't quite the original version. It was this middle ground, um, which is again something I sort of miss them doing now. Is I kind of like that you're like, oh, I like the 1999 version of "Have You Seen
Yep.
Me Lately" kind of thing, which I feel like I wish there was still a little bit more of. Even Mr. Jones, I feel like always morphed and changed over the years. And you can kind of
Mm.
hear if you just listen to a Mr. Jones from like you just jump ahead 2 years, it'll sound different. Like they'll go back to an acoustic thing, but it won't quite sound like the storyteller's thing, or they'd play it up tempo, but it wouldn't sound like the original. It would have something would have happened to it.
Mm.
Um,
It's funny listening back is one memory that came back because remember this was my first show, and at this point, I mean, I was always a big fan. I just didn't have either the money or the car or whatever. Um, and even then, it came back again, which is that at that point you don't even know if you're ever going to see them again, right?
mhm.
So I had 3 albums, and I wanted to hear them play all the songs live from the new album that I just spent a week preparing for, like I was preparing for my PhD, the prelims or something like that. But you also kind of wanted to hear as many as the other songs from the other albums as possible since you've never seen any of them live. And
Right.
I remember that I was not annoyed. I mean, I liked every song, but a little bit of me was like, because I think I've said before that compared to other people, maybe round here I don't love as much, especially back then they were playing a longer version. And Mercury, which I know you like, they played a longer version of that too. And I remember I liked both, but I thought, geez, that's like kind of a total of 20 minutes. They could have played five other songs that I hadn't heard before ever, since I've never been to a concert. Did you like that Mercury version?
It was good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was good. And the love and addiction thing. I just think is such a it's a fun thing. I don't know. I
And
like it.
and I'd like to hear it more now, right now that I've seen so many. But I could
Well,
not.
no,
Yeah,
I'm with you. I do get the idea of, and it's an interesting thing with the band, right? Of seeing more versus seeing this like special version. And yeah, I get it. Like the first time, you're like, well, I really just want to see them. I want to see them play this, Especially, I think I feel like now it's so easy to go on and get a sense of what a band's set list is like and what a song sounds like now if you just want to go, on YouTube. But then it was hard, right? Like it wasn't
yeah,
something, that you had any sense of, right? You hadn't heard them play the Long Mercury. They,
right. I didn't know anything
maybe a
about.
couple bootlegs that were around at that point, but you weren't trading them.
Yeah,
So
no, that's exactly right. And my only sense of their of them playing live was actually listening to the live from the 10 spot. So I really,
from the same
yeah,
place, I guess that's a question. Was that like a big thing? Was it a little bit of a thing for you, like walking into the Hammerstein, given that
yeah.
you knew? Yeah.
Plus, it's New York City, right? And I'm not from New York City. So anything you ever do in New York City when you're not from New York City, you're like, I'm at the big time now. This is it. I've made it to New York City, right? That's what kind of what you
Right.
think.
Well, and I thought it's one of the things about the Hammerstein that gives it that vibe is that you're 3 blocks from Madison Square Garden. You're in
Yep.
the heart of it's like there's a strong like New York energy walking into the Hammerstein Ballroom. It's not like, oh, I'm happen to be in New York and I'm uptown or I'm downtown and it's not really that. It's like, no, it feels like how you would stereotype like walking into a show in New York.
That's
You
right.
know?
Yeah, no, I
Um
think that. And then I felt like cooler because I didn't have to get a hotel. I had a friend in
mm,
Queens, right? I am a real, either New Yorker or was a New Yorker or whatever. So yeah, it's funny though. So like I just said, my memory was more, and it's interesting by the way about 4 days because that just, I'm pretty sure now 4 days is might make my white whale list because I thought that this might have been the show that I had seen it, but I think that was a typo. So I think I've never seen it,
oh.
and I really like that song. But my memory is actually more of the Desert Life song. So I do not remember them kicking off the show with "Murder of One." I mean
Mm,
that's pretty wild that was the kickoff song, right? Because we think of that more as a showstopper near the end
yeah.
and a closer. So boy, talk about getting the fans excited early. Now, and a little bit, I'm like, oh, I do kind of remember jumping up and down the first song, and I think that's why because it was Murder of One, and I didn't remember them ending with Walkaways because I don't know. Part of me was like, oh, I didn't see that. Yeah, I didn't see them end with that very much, but they did on my first show. So
But maybe you'd had some drinks at that point in the
yeah,
end.
maybe I had some drinks in long December. And yeah, it was funny. I can't tell for sure, but the crowd obviously is very energetic. Like this is in the height of their popularity, and maybe not the height, but this is still during those glory days. That it sounds like this. The crowd was singing back some of the lyrics to Walkaways, which
Mhm.
um, partly they had just finished Long December, right? That was before, so that's how it is on the track listing, right? So anybody that had the album and they like Long December, they're going to know Walkaways, right? Because it plays right after. Back then, you'd actually have to get up and manually eject the CD if you didn't want to hear the next track, and it's only a 90-second song anyway. So anyway, yeah, that's so yeah, great memories, and I do appreciate and as we'll get into your set list, just like I said that they weren't shy about playing Desert Life in your set list. Boy, were they perfect in balancing their track list.
Yeah, although again, part of it I think is the timing, right? So the show we're going to talk about the second one, November 16th, 2004. So this is post Hard Candy Tour, post even a year of films about ghosts, and essentially they are not quite touring, but this show is basically built on Accidentally in Love.
Hmm.
Kind of an interesting thing. The show was both a benefit for um, Toys for Teens, not Toys for Tots, Toys for
Oh.
Teens, and also though was webcasted as part of a promotion with the release of the DVD of Shrek 2.
Okay.
I know. It's interesting. Again, the things we remember and the things that we don't. I remember that getting tickets to this somehow involved the fact that I was in the fan club at the time, Cloud Cuckoo Land.
Yep.
I can't remember if they were free and I won a contest, or if I just had the opportunity to purchase them because I was in the fan club. I don't recall. I want to say I got them for free because I remember struggling a little bit with who to take.
Mm.
So and for set seeds for me, I'm a senior in college at this point in suburban Philadelphia. And unsurprisingly, for a small liberal arts college in the early 2000s, I knew a lot of Counting Crows fans. This was not a passion of mine that was unshared by people. And so I did end up going with a girl that I ended up, we had not dated yet, but we ended up dating. Um, and I remember, I think feeling a little bit guilty because I was like, oh, I got other friends I could take, and wasn't sure, and I feel like it was a free ticket. It was like, who's my plus one going to be? And I picked her. And then we ended up we dated for a little bit. Then we were friends in New York, and she ended up coming with me to a show in 2009. She was a very big Crows fan. So she was not someone I was just taking. She really enjoyed the show and was very excited to see them. Um, and so we, first of all, just also took the train, took an Amtrak from Philly up to New York. And I will say, just by the way, turned right around and I didn't have a place. I guess I could have stayed with my parents. I could have, but we were like, no, we got to get back for class because I think this was like a Thursday. I'd be like, okay, back to class Friday morning. So we literally like went straight back to Penn Station and grabbed an Amtrak back to Philly.
Okay. Okay.
um, and so, yeah, it's interesting. But to that point, though, about the set list, I think the set list is an interesting and very balanced one because they're not promoting a record other than, yeah, they got to play Accidentally in Love if this is literally for Shrek 2.
Right.
Um, Other than that, this was pretty much like just mixing it up, right? We're going to play some Hard Candy.
Yeah, it looks like it was four songs from August, and then three from Hard Candy, three from Recovering, and three from Desert Life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then a cover or two covers, and then the Accidentally in Love.
Although at that point, they had gotten into the songs they were doing, I think, from um, this Desert Life at that point were kind of a standard, right? They were playing
Oh
Mrs.
yes,
Potters, they're playing Hanging Around, they're playing St. Robinson, they were
and
playing less of
and
the other.
Colorblind.
Oh,
Yeah.
Colorblind, let's go. Yes. Um, yeah, so a little bit less. And I think this was a time period for their shows where the variety was not wild. They were playing different sets every night, but if you look back at the 2004 set lists, they're not varying a dramatic amount. They're
Right.
different, but they're not um, crazy different. A couple memories. First, love that they opened with Rain King, one of my all-time favorite songs, and just to get that as the opener, it's always nice to get that out of the way. I actually really this is high on my favorite versions of Rain King. So first, the alt is "Someone to Watch Over Me," which I think is a really beautiful thing that really fits the nature of the song. It always the lyrics track, right, the feeling of need and uh what the singer of the rest of the song is looking for really, to me, connects to um those lyrics, those Gershwin lyrics, or "Someone to Watch Over
Mm.
Me." I, in fact, designed a T-shirt at some point on one of those websites where you could just kind of get one, but that had the lyrics to that, like a Rain King sort of print and kind of like a collegiate font on the front, and the lyrics of that on the back. And also a bit that I don't think he did anywhere else. I don't think I've seen in this any other ones where he sings, "She will say yes and yes and yes and no," which is also very poignant because I think that is how I felt about the person I was with at that point. So really, really hitting me in the feels and in the direct feelings at that point. And then straight into Mrs. Potter's, which is also one of my other favorite songs. So the idea of just Rain King, Mrs. Potter's is great. Even though I always love that when they open with those two songs, because it's like 17 minutes. They're
Yeah.
17 minutes deep in two songs.
If
Like
you're gonna say, I thought it was quite a. I don't know what their best version is, but I thought it was quite a good version of Mrs. Potter's.
mhm.
It was like kind of almost lighter feeling than even. It almost had more of that David feel. David said he wanted like it. But then the last verse really rocked. Like they really brought it for that last fourth verse. Anyway, that got my attention.
No, I'm with you. And definitely, look, I think the whole night has kind of a unique energy. They're clearly amongst, in part because this is not like a show as part of a tour. It seems like a lot of Adam's friends are there. Adam says at some point, "Yeah, I've had some drinks tonight," which I recall too. Like he seemed,
Right.
my friend was a singer, and she was like, "Well, it's kind of he's hitting these notes, and he's definitely drunk. He's very good at this." Like, yeah, I figured that, but yeah, he says at this at some point towards the end, like, I'm gonna go have a drink. Well, more drinks. Um, but definitely an interesting. It's a very loose vibe of
Can
the
I just
show.
interject one thing? One thing that I don't, I should do this more off our podcast. But when you said about hitting those notes and stuff, I was thinking actually recently when we've been listening to Adam on a lot of these podcasts,
Hmm.
and he talks about both his like natural ability and his like love of English and everything, and his heart and his work ethic about how he became like a great songwriter. Right? It was like a combination of everything. I don't hear him talk much about how he felt his singing, how much of that was natural ability versus hard work and training. I just haven't heard because that. I mean, let's just say me. I mean, I don't know. I think I have kind of a radio voice, and some of that I know you could train, but some of it you have, and I think I could be a writer. I could not be. At least I don't think I could ever be a singer because I don't think I have that
I
special
can't.
thing. So
I tried.
I've always been curious about that with Adam. Anyway, and when you said that
Yeah.
he's so talented he could even do it after those drinks and hit those high notes. Um, yeah. So anyway,
No, and it's interesting, and it'd be interesting to hear about that too, because I feel like with a lot of singers, you'll hear like they were kind of naturals, and then at some point they took their work on it up a level,
yes, and that's
and
what
I
I'm
wonder when that
guessing.
was for him,
Yeah, and I
you know.
remember him talking about like singing to like I think it was like girls when he was junior high at some religious thing, or I don't remember. But there was something where he did mention that he did some singing. But yeah, I'm guessing that's the answer. But I just haven't heard enough because he. It's not just that as you said he's a lead singer. He's really talented, especially back then at hitting some of those high notes. And yeah, so
Yeah, no, and again, again, to your point though, a lot of balance and fun in the set. Anna Begins was not a super regular song at that point, although it maybe hurt your heart because he blows the lyrics to it. He
oh,
blows
I
like
missed
the
that a
middle.
little, but I did say actually this they're playing the version that we know now, and I actually thought it was a almost. I actually wrote here, except for that mess up. I thought it was almost a near perfect version of
Yeah,
that one that we've grown the non album version. Let's just say.
yeah. There's a lot of Adam banter in this show too. He was loose. He talks about politics. Remember, this is like about 2 weeks, like maybe less, that after Bush versus Kerry.
Yes.
He talks about like what is important in a democracy is even after a contentious election that we can all accept victory and defeat. Which it seems so quaint 20 years in the past that he's talking
Oh, of
about that
course.
as a contentious election.
It's very interesting. No, I just thought about this, yeah, because of the same thing. That and obviously, for those that don't know, he used to really push vote registration, and he said, I have my political opinions, but I don't even care what party you vote for. I just want you active." So even here, he actually admitted, although I guess it was already known, but yes, I wanted Kerry to win, but it's okay. The
Well, because
democracy
he
is not over.
specifically he says, and this is Matt's last show. He's
Yeah.
like, remember, we can't all be winners. That's a winner over there. Matt's a winner.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, that's a he's like pointing at him. Um the He talks about the process of being nominated for an Oscar, that apparently you need to apply to be nominated for an Academy Award, and he needed to do that. There's a very funny banter about that.
By the way, that's consistent. By the way, even in the his kind of banter about it is consistent with the podcast we just listened to, Lip Service, where he basically says he doesn't like award shows. He never wanted to. If he did, he would just go to the Oscar. Like it is funny. Like that was 20 years ago, almost to the date, and what he says now about award shows is exactly what he said back then in concert. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was
Um
great.
there's
I'm
an
still laughing at the Matt thing, by the way, because again, we didn't ask Matt, but there is part of me. I mean, if I had a guess, Matt is not like a die. I actually think my total guess is he's not a diehard Republican. He just was really into Bush at that point, particularly because of September 11th and some of these things. And I just laugh though that going back, especially thinking now and how it might have caused a riff, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. There's a really interesting version of Goodnight Elizabeth in this, and so I'll make a note here about So what you can't see on the bootleg. So it's a really interesting alt in the middle. Adam talks about charity for a solid couple minutes, goes into telling verbally the story about his first girlfriend, or his girlfriend when they went on tour, leaving him thinking he was cheating. And then said, basically afterwards, I kind of was, she thought I was cheating, and then she broke up with me, and then I was kind of, I believe the quote is, I was a tramp. Um, and then quote, how many of you did I sleep with? Be honest with me. Um, but there's also, and remember, this was I thought one of the weird things, a way he was maybe had been drinking. So again, there's a webcast for this that you got a thing for if you purchased the DVD for Shrek 2. So presumably children, right? Child heavy group.
Mm.
He's telling the story,
Oh,
but
right.
then when he sings, "I'll miss you when I'm slipping in between," he kind of gyrates in a
Which he's done
sort of a
every so
thrusting
often in
motion.
certain song. Yeah.
I've seen that other times, but
Yeah.
it was particularly weird in a show that was dedicated to a song for a children's movie. It was
Well,
a moment. It was a moment.
on the other side, though, the webcasts back then were so grainy and you couldn't see
This is true.
anything that maybe.
You can find. I think you can find. I think you can still find some of that webcast on YouTube, and it's pretty grainy. Yeah, it's not great. Um, I love. There's a great intro to Long December. If you haven't heard that, they have play a long kind of piano
Oh.
intro to that. Yeah, really good show. I remember again my friend really was into Sullivan Street, so she was very excited they played that.
I just because we brought it up a couple times, and obviously the podcast is. It's so funny
Named
because
it.
of the podcast that Sullivan Street jumped up like 20 spots as soon as I got involved with Sullivan Street. Now it's moved up in my own personal ranking. But I know you like it as an intro song, and I do
Mm,
appreciate it, Dan. But I actually like it as little more as the encore, as the first from the encore, which they do sometimes.
yeah.
Um, that's where I like it placed.
No, I think it works there too. It definitely works there too. I think particularly again, you know my feeling about the Runaway
Yeah.
alt. I really love those early like those 94 where they encore with that and it's just like this like devastating end to this like sad hour and a half of music.
Right.
It's beautiful. Um but yeah, I think
I
that's
always
it's
like
a
when an
great show.
encore. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say because but part of it's because Sullivan Street, but I always like when an encore. Of course, an encore usually has like one song that they didn't play yet. Oh, I know
Mm,
they're gonna play Long December, but they didn't play it yet. I hope they play it in the encore. And I also love when an encore from an act has more of a deep cut.
mm.
Like these are for the fans, and that's where I feel Sullivan Street fits in for the Crows because it was never a single. You have to own that album to know Sullivan Street.
Yeah, and they did that.
So
I think they used it as part of the encore in one of the shows last summer, just
yes, I
once.
think
I think
so. Yeah.
when they played 2 nights in a row at in like
Yeah.
Woodinville, they used it one of those nights, and I thought it was great. Um, the other thing that I was always disappointed. So I was initially disappointed, and then the internet solved. So there's a very very good the what version of the show that circulates is a soundboard recording. So it's one of the best tapes you can listen to because it sounds pristine. It's beautiful. Um, so apparently what happened is that they had decided to I guess test out the technology in terms of like doing an instant live recording and they handed out CDs on the sidewalk. But I think because I was sprinting to a train, I missed that. And the next morning, when I found out that I could have had a CD with a soundboard recording for free, they were just giving them out because I think they were testing it out. I was devastated. You've met me, Eric. You know how much I like tapes, and I was already pretty
Right.
into tapes at this point. The idea that I could have had one of those, I was almost in tears. But then high speed internet was getting better at this point. I had a CD burner, and within the week, I had a copy that didn't have whatever was official, but I had the exact same thing, and it was okay. And I've listened to the tape many times since then, and I have survived not getting. Although you can hear it in my voice, I'm still a little salty. I'm still a little salty that I didn't get
Oh, Well, my
A
story was
memento.
with that was or similar was that because I was on the internet pretty early. My a lot of my friends were in computer science majors, and they
Mhm,
were letting me know when Internet 1.0 was there. They're like, look at this, look at this. I remember like when ESPN launched and all that kind of stuff.
mhm.
But I was went to the Crows website pretty regularly, and for some reason I didn't go for a couple weeks or I didn't have money or something, and I missed the release of can I get the by the time I get to Woodstock.
Oh,
And I
yeah,
thought I'll never get that. It was a limited pressing, and I was like, I'll never get this. So not only did the internet solve that later, but one of my friends actually had that, which I had no idea, and mailed me the hard copy 20 years later. So I did end up getting it from a friend who is not as into crows as he used to be. So.
yeah. Well, that's actually a question. Well, we'll take this up, but we got to talk. Do we have to do an episode on by the time we get to
Oh, of
Woodstock?
course. And then they had
Face
the
the
other
promised
one,
land.
face the
Face the
promised
promised
land.
land.
So maybe we'll do them both in one day.
We'll
I'm
do them
guessing. Oh,
together. Yeah.
yeah. No. Oh, absolutely. I had that on the list. One thing that you didn't. So only one thing I didn't mention. Two things I didn't mention about my show, and we can bring up to you. One difference, of course, besides the 5 years, is I believe there was no Emmy on my tour, and Emmy was on your tour because I even
Right
listened
before
when
he
he
joined the band.
thanked. Yeah, so he even though he was in he was in the band for this Desert, or at least he was in the photo of Desert Life. I guess he wasn't.
Yeah.
I forget. He's not an official member there, right?
I think this is right. That may have been right before he joined them on tour.
Yeah, exactly. And then there,
Because
right,
he's
there's
on during the TDL tour, he joins them for sure.
he
But I don't
joined them.
recall the exact date on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I forget that on this Desert Life, if he was an official, I know he's in the photo, but I almost think he wasn't an official member when they released the CD. I got to look at that again. And the other thing that caught my attention, I forget what it was with yours, or maybe they didn't have it, but now they always end with California Dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
But on mine, I saw it was not. I think it was a Tom Petty song that I couldn't figure out. I'd have to ask Google or
Yeah.
something.
Well, they
Um,
came out to Magical Mystery Tour.
that okay, and I
That
remember
was
that.
their coming out. Yeah,
Yes.
coming out song.
But I thought they always did California Dreaming because in my mind they always did, and I was like, no, they didn't always, obviously. So at the end of the show,
I
so
wonder if we can. Let me. This is bad. This is bad podcasting here.
oh, if not, I can pause for a second. Anyway, okay. Did you have anything else? We've gotten we basically covered most of the things we wanted to cover. Anything else about the venue or any other news?
I think. Well, I'll just say again. I will just highly recommend Hammerstein 2004. That's a tape that's really spectacular. I think that's one of the not just because I was there. It's a pretty good tape to check out from that era of the band. I think they sound again just given the sound quality and the performance level. It's an interesting night with pristine sound quality and a really good performance. So worth checking out if you haven't. Go hit Crowstown and grab that one.
Yeah, it's interesting you talked about the set list in that it was getting more regular. I mean, and you could argue that that was almost a transition time when they were moving from a studio album band into a touring band. Like, not
Yeah,
yet, but getting towards that way.
for
Right.
sure. Yeah, I think, and it's an interesting because they didn't end up touring at all in 2005. They did a couple of like one-off shows basically. They came back in '06 and pulled a couple of new things out, but that's a tour they did with the Goo Goo Dolls, and so they were playing. They were alternating headlining, and they were only playing about 80, 85 minutes a night. Um, so that tour has some interesting stuff, but again, was frequently kind of a very samey tour. And then the next year, when they did the Ballpark tour, they really kind of busted out the set list again. They really, and in part related to them having the songs for Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. So an interesting point there of like that got them thinking about, oh, I gotta, what other interesting things could we grab? It always has seemed like kind of a theme for them because some of the years where they've gone back on tour with an album have also been years where they've been like, oh, what if we play this old song or this old song that we
Right.
haven't done in a bit?
Yeah.
So maybe Sweet Tooth will lead them to be thinking about some new songs they haven't played in a while, and it'll kind of freshen up, and we'll see some different stuff that we haven't heard in a bit.
So for
Maybe
those
maybe
fans of
maybe hit the atmosphere.
yeah, I was gonna say I was even gonna be fun. I was saying for those fans of New Frontier and I don't know. I was gonna say something else, but
No,
yeah, they
don't
were.
even suggest that, Eric.
It might be.
We'll
Okay.
get to the hard candy rankings,
Yeah.
and we'll tell you
Yeah.
exactly how low New Frontier is on my list.
Okay. And yeah. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. I kind of like it. I'm not
Spoiler.
sure. I'm not sure
Oh,
where it
woo.
ranks. I'm not sure where it ranks compared to the other songs, but I kind of like it. So, okay. So anyway, another great episode, and thank you everyone for
And now we
listening.
know we're going to see if our friendship can survive the conversation we have about New Frontier on the
Oh,
episode about in a couple months.
I was just going to say. Well, we already survived Mercury, so for New Frontier is going to
Yeah,
be no problem.
no
So,
problem.
and the time and time again Sullivan's time and time again and Ghost Train debacle. So we worked through all that.
We've been civil.
Yes.
As
So
as Adam told us, right? It's not about who wins or loses an election. It's about being civil in the process and wherever the rankings land. So far, we found a way to be civil, Eric. But we'll see.
I agree. Well, and thank you everyone, and we will see you next time right down here on Sullivan Street. Goodbye.